Today I'm going to show you historical, linguistic, and genetic evidence that will fundamentally change how you understand not just Iran, but the entire Middle East. We're going to examine why Iranians are not Arabs, why they're not descendants of Ishmael, and what their real biblical lineage means for understanding both ancient history and modern conflicts. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the current Iran-Israel conflict has nothing to do with Isaac versus Ishmael, and everything to do with much more complex historical, political, and ethnic realities that most people completely misunderstand. So prepare to have your assumptions challenged and your understanding transformed. We'll examine why the popular Arabs versus Jews framework is so incredibly inaccurate, why this misrepresentation is so pervasive today, and what a proper understanding of Iranian origins reveals about ancient prophecy, modern conflicts, and the true diversity of the Middle East. Let's start by defining our terms. Who exactly are the Arabs, genetically speaking? Arabs refer to the ethnic group that shares a common genetic heritage and traces its ancestry back to the Arabian Peninsula. This is supported by extensive genetic research showing that various Arab groups throughout the Middle East share distinct genetic markers that set them apart from other Middle Eastern populations. Linguistically, Arabs are defined by those who speak Arabic as their native language. While many non-Arab peoples like Persians have adopted Arabic as a second language, their primary native tongue remains Persian, Turkish, Kurdish, etc. Historically, Arabs are identified through their shared cultural traditions, values, and tribal affiliations that stretch back thousands of years. These traditions are well documented in both Arab historical records and outside sources like the Bible and ancient historians like Herodotus. To summarize, Arabs refer to a distinct ethnic group united by genetics, language, history, and culture. This is crucial to realize when discussing Middle Eastern conflicts, because lumping all Middle Eastern Muslims into a single Arab category ignores the incredible diversity of peoples living in that region. So where does Iran fit into this picture? Are Iranians Arabs? The answer is no. In fact, Iranians belong to an entirely different ethnic group known as Persians, which predates both Islam and the Arab peoples. This is evidenced by several factors. 1. Geographical location. Iranians reside in the geographical region of Iran, historically known as Persia, completely separate from the Arabian Peninsula. 2. Native language. Their native language is Persian, also called Farsi, completely unrelated to Arabic. 3. Historical records. Ancient texts going back thousands of years mention the Persians as a distinct people with their own language, culture, and kings, long before the rise of Islam. 4. Genetic studies. Genetic research shows that Iranians cluster separately from Arab populations, indicating different ancestral origins. If Iranians aren't Arabs, then why is the common assumption that they are? Much of this confusion stems from 2. 1. The Middle East's geographic proximity to the Arabian Peninsula leads people to assume Iranians must be Arab, but remember, geography alone cannot define ethnicity. 2. Because Iranians are predominantly Muslim. Many assume they must be Arab due to the widespread belief that Islam automatically equates to being Arab. But again, religion does not determine ethnicity. It's possible for non-Arab peoples to convert to Islam. The idea that Islam equals being Arab is a relatively recent development, mainly popularized in the last century or so. For much of history, there was no such thing as a monolithic Arab world. Prior to the 20th century, the term Arab primarily referred to the nomadic tribes of the Arabian Peninsula. Other Muslim peoples like Persians, Turks, Kurds, etc. were not considered Arab. It was only after Pan-Arabism movements gained traction in the early 20th century that there was a concerted effort to redefine Arab as an all-encompassing term for all Muslims. Fortunately, this inaccurate conflation has seeped into popular discussions about the Middle East, leading to vast misunderstandings. Many people genuinely believe that anyone Muslim must be Arab by default, which couldn't be further from the truth. We can see this ethnic confusion permeating discussions about Iran and its conflicts. If one simply reads news articles or social media posts about Iran without critically examining assumptions, one will come away believing that Iranians are inherently Arab, despite all evidence to the contrary. This misunderstanding inevitably spills over into biblical interpretation. If one believes Iranians are Arab by definition, then it follows that they are descendants of Ishmael, making the Iran-Israel conflict a literal fulfillment of Isaiah versus Ishmael. But as we've shown, this premise is entirely false. Iranians are not Arab, and they are not descendants of Ishmael. Applying biblical prophecies based on this false assumption inevitably leads to failed predictions and a distorted understanding of Middle Eastern conflicts. Only when we acknowledge the incredible diversity of Middle Eastern peoples and understand the distinct origins and histories of groups like the Iranians can we begin to interpret biblical prophecies about the end times with accuracy. In the next chapter, we'll explore Iranian origins in detail, uncovering their true biblical lineage that completely contradicts the popular Arabs versus Jews narrative. So join me next time as we uncover fascinating historical, linguistic, and genetic evidence revealing who Iranians really are and what their existence reveals about ancient Middle Eastern conflicts. Today, parts of the Middle East live under Persian and Arab domination, respectively. But what does the Bible say about their shared ancestor, Ishmael? Is there evidence that Persian people are descended from him? To answer, we must go back to the origins of the Arab peoples. Who were the Arabs? In the modern sense, the term Arab refers to various peoples across the Middle East who speak Arabic and share cultural traditions rooted in the Arabian Peninsula. But in the biblical and early Islamic context, Arab had a more specific meaning. The Bible first uses the term Arab in Genesis 25-13 to describe one of Isaac's grandsons. This makes the ancient Arabs part of the lineage of Abraham through Isaac, just like the ancient Israelites. Importantly, the Bible never conflates the Arabs with the Persians. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which detail the origins of Persian Jews, consistently differentiate between the two groups. For example, Ezra 8:36 says, "These were the people of Israel, priests and Levites who had separated themselves from the peoples of the lands and their customs, their laws, their statutes, and their ordinances." And Nehemiah 9:2 says, "And they separated themselves from the people and the officials, from all the mixed multitude, and they stood up and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers." These passages clearly distinguish the Israelites and priests from other Middle Eastern peoples, including those who may have been considered Arab at the time. The only apparent overlap comes from the fact that many ancient Israelites also worshipped one God. But monotheism alone cannot define an ethnicity. Both Arabs and Persians had monotheistic periods before the rise of Islam. Moreover, monotheism did not prevent ancient Persians from worshipping other deities alongside their supreme god. In short, there is no solid evidence that ancient Persian people were descendants of Abraham's son Ishmael. Therefore, we must reject claims that Persians are Arabs based on biblical genealogy. Additionally, the cultural, linguistic, and historical differences between Persians and Arabs are too great to ignore. They belong to entirely separate ethnic and language families. We must recognize their distinct origins and heritages rather than conflating them. Such conflation stems from a lack of understanding of Middle Eastern history and the diversity within that region. Furthermore, attempts to link Persians to Ishmael often rely on uncritical acceptance of Islamic sources, which present a particular narrative favorable to Islam. However, accepting Islamic accounts without further scrutiny would be problematic, because they could contain biases or agendas that do not align with historical objectivity. A comprehensive understanding requires consulting diverse sources, especially non-Muslim ones, and critically examining the evidence. In conclusion, the claim that Persians are descendants of Abraham's son Ishmael lacks historical and genealogical support. It ignores fundamental ethnic, cultural, and linguistic differences between Persians and Arabs. Furthermore, it relies on potentially biased sources and agendas. To comprehend the complexities of Middle Eastern history, we must accurately identify key players like the Persians and Arabs and acknowledge their distinct origins, cultures, and heritages. Doing so allows for a deeper understanding of the region's rich tapestry and the various factors shaping its modern dynamics. Thank you for watching. The Bible explicitly links Iranian peoples to Japheth through the genealogy of Madeh, the ancestor of the Medes. This fits with the genetic reality confirmed by modern science. But what does the Bible say about Arab origins? The answer is found in Genesis 10:21-22. It says that the descendants of Shem included his son Aram, became the ancestor of the Syrian and Arabian peoples, and his son Ashur, who became the ancestor of the Assyrian and Akkadian peoples. So the Bible clearly indicates that Arabs and Assyrians, Akkadians, share common ancestry through their common ancestor Aram, making them more closely related to each, not only genetically, but also biblically.
Oh.
Does this mean that Arabs and Iranians are the same people? No, while both groups may have Middle Eastern roots going back to Abraham, they diverged long ago and developed distinct identities, and the genetic evidence confirms this. As we saw in Chapter 5, modern Arabs and Iranian populations show completely different genetic patterns, markers, and lineages. This means they have separate ancestral origins and did not recently descend from a common population. It's important to recognize that shared ancestry so many generations ago does not negate the distinct ethnic, cultural, and linguistic differences that developed over time. For example, just as the Israelites and Arabs branched off from their common ancestor, Abraham, and developed separate cultures and religions thousands of years ago, they are not considered the same people today because their paths diverged so long ago. Similarly, the ancient Iranian and Arabian populations likely diverged around 4,000 years ago during the Bronze Age, leading to the development of completely different languages, cultures, and genetic lineages. In summary, the idea that Persians and Arabs are the same people lacks any basis in fact. There is no credible evidence that they share a recent common ancestry, whether linguistic, genetic, historical, or biblical. On the contrary, extensive evidence shows that Persians belong to the Indo-European family, having migrated from Central Asia thousands of years ago. Meanwhile, Arabs belong to the Semitic family, descending from Abraham and the ancient Mesopotamian peoples. Despite ancient connections, Iranian and Arabian populations diverged thousands of years ago, developing into distinct ethnic groups with separate histories, cultures, languages, and genetic lineages. To continue claiming otherwise ignores overwhelming evidence and perpetuates harmful stereotypes and divisions. Hopefully, this brief overview has shed some light on the distinct origins and realities of these two ancient and influential civilizations. Iranians are not Arabs. They are not descended from Ishmael, nor do they represent the descendants of Ham. Rather, biblical genealogy links them to Japheth. But isn't that a problem? How does the Bible link Iranians to Japheth, while acknowledging that they speak an entirely different language and have no cultural similarities to Europeans? We'll address those questions next, starting with this one. The Bible explicitly states that after the flood, Shem, Ham, and Japheth had sons who represent early human migration patterns. These migrations brought about the distinct peoples, nations, and languages found in the world after the flood. But where do Iranians fit into this scheme? Notice the following. The Bible says Japheth settled in the region of the rivers of his homeland. Many believe this is Central Asia. Media is listed as one of the early settlements of Japheth's descendants. Many scholars believe Media is linked to Iran. First, we'll look at ancient sources that support this conclusion. Then we'll consider how these ancient facts help us better interpret biblical prophecy and current events. Ancient sources confirm this biblical genealogy. Herodotus describes the relationship between Medes and Persians. He believed the Persians were originally a Median people. Other Persian royal inscriptions acknowledge their Median heritage. Archaeological evidence shows clear cultural continuity between the Median and later Persian civilizations. All this supports the biblical account linking Iranians back to the post-flood Median people. Biblical genealogy also aligns with evidence of Indo-European, Aryan migrations around 1800 BCE. Ancient texts from Central Asia tell of Indo-European tribes migrating into Iran around this time. This migration pattern matches the biblical timeline for when population groups began dispersing after the flood. The geographic spread of Iranian languages across the Iranian plateau also matches. Biblical accounts of Japhetic expansion east from Central Asia into the region we know as Iran. Then there's the fact that Iranian languages belong to the Indo-European language family. All Japhetic peoples speak Indo-European languages, which reinforces the connection between Iranians and the biblical ancestors listed as Madai. In short, linguistic and archaeological data converge with the biblical account to show that Iranians are indeed descendants of Madai. So Iranians are part of the Japhetic family? But how does the Bible link them to Europe if they speak a different language and have no cultural similarities? Well, think of language and culture as lenses that help us understand how a people group sees the world. These lenses can become cloudy or tinted based on external factors like empires, conquests, and adoptions of new religions. For example, the Islamic conquest of Iran dramatically reshaped the cultural landscape, influencing everything from daily practices to literature and art. Recognizing this, it becomes clearer how Iranian distinctiveness can fit within the biblical framework. When viewed through the lens of ethnicity, Iranians are clearly a distinct people, separate from both Arabs and Europeans. While cultures change over time, ethnicity often persists as a continuous thread connecting people to their ancient origins. For Iranians, the continuity of ethnicity is evident. Even today, the name Iran itself reflects the ancient Persian identity. Likewise, their customs, traditions, and history all point back to a rich heritage rooted in the land of Iran. Understanding Iranian biblical ancestry affects how we view prophecy. Many prophetic passages link Iran with Shem and point to conflict between Shem and Japheth. However, if Iranians are descendants of Japheth, then conflicts involving Iranians won't represent the ancient Shem-Japheth divide. Rather, they will involve different branches of Noah's family. In summary, Iranians are not Arabs. They are not descended from Ishmael. Or do they represent the descendants of Ham? Instead, biblical genealogy links them to Japheth. Their linguistic and archaeological heritage aligns with the biblical account of Indo-European migrations into Iran around 1800 BCE. Additionally, the distinctness of Iranian culture helps explain why they are not grouped with European peoples, despite speaking Indo-European languages. Instead, Iranians represent a unique branch of humanity linked to the ancient Median people mentioned in the Bible. Knowing this should affect how we interpret prophecy and current events. Conflicts involving Iran should not be viewed through a simplistic Ishmaelitic or Ham-Japheth framework. Rather, they involve different branches of Noah's family. Moreover, Iranians' distinct ethnic identity helps explain why they often clash with Arab nations, despite shared Islamic faith. Their unique blend of Persian ethnicity and Islamic religion has shaped their national identity and foreign policy goals. As we close this chapter, remember that understanding Iranian distinctiveness fits within a biblical framework. While cultures change, ethnicity often endures as a connection to one's roots. Iranians' cultural and linguistic heritage points to their ancient origins in the land of Iran. Furthermore, recognizing Iranian distinctiveness helps fulfill the Great Commission by opening doors for sharing the gospel. Iranians' unique cultural context shapes how they view the world, and that must be considered when presenting the Christian message. By understanding Iranian culture and history, we can more effectively communicate the gospel in a way that respects their traditions while presenting the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. Wrong. Iran vs. Israel equals Ishmael vs. Isaac. Correct. Iran vs. Israel equals Persian nationalism vs. Jewish nationalism. Wrong. All Middle Eastern conflicts fulfill the Isaac-Ishmael prophecy. Correct. Multiple ethnic groups with different biblical lineages compete for influence. Proper prophetic interpretation must identify Persia or Iran as representing the Japhetic or Median peoples in prophecy, the Arab nations as representing the Ishmaelite or Semitic peoples, Israel as representing the Israelites or Jewish peoples. Other ethnic groups like the Turks and Kurds as having their own distinct prophetic roles. End times prophecy involves multiple ethnic groups, not just two. Alliances are based on politics, not just ethnicity. Religious, ethnic, and national factors are all at play. God's plan includes all of Noah's descendants. This understanding helps Christians properly interpret biblical prophecy. Policymakers understand the complexity of the Middle East. Citizens avoid ethnic stereotyping and oversimplification. Scholars accurately analyze regional dynamics. Most importantly, This investigation reveals that God's salvation is available to all ethnic groups. Current conflicts are political, not predetermined by ancient genealogy. Understanding the differences between these ethnic groups promotes respect rather than division. For example, the Iranian people are not Arabs. They are not descendants of Ishmael, and they are not simply another Muslim ethnic group. The Iranian people represent an ancient, distinct Indo-European civilization that has maintained its identity through millennia of conquest and change. Understanding these truths doesn't resolve the current conflicts in the Middle East, but it does provide the accurate foundation necessary for proper prophetic interpretation. Effective diplomatic engagement, respectful, cross-cultural understanding, and accurate historical and biblical analysis. Instead of reducing complex ethnic realities to oversimplified religious narratives, we should celebrate the diversity of human civilization while working toward understanding peace and the salvation that God offers to all peoples. Persian, Arab, Jewish, and every other ethnic group descended from Noah's sons. Truth about ethnic origins should unite us in appreciation for God's diverse creation. Divide us through false assumptions and dangerous stereotypes.